The Dershow.
According to the prosecution's theory, in order to convict Trump, you have to prove all of the following things. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, A, that the entry made in the corporate forms calling payments a retainer or legal expenses instead of reimbursement for a non-disclosure agreement, that the entry, the very entry of that statement was fraudulent. That's the first, and they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I don't think it was fraudulent. He didn't say, first of all, before we get to who said it, but in itself, it wasn't fraudulent. It didn't say it was construction costs. It didn't say it was something that was so clearly deductible. It didn't say anything like that. It just said, retainer, legal expenses, instead of being very specific and saying legal expenses for avoiding a trial and avoiding the embarrassment of a disclosure of alleged sexual encounter with a porn star. So the first question is, was that fraudulent at all? I don't think it was fraudulent. Usually for it to be fraudulent, it has to be very deceptive. And if it had been construction costs, maybe it would have been fraudulent. But saying legal expenses and legal retainer instead of legal payments, reimbursement to avoid a lawsuit and to avoid embarrassment and to avoid losing his contract with the television network and to help him in his presidential campaign, that I don't think was fraudulent. So number one, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the entry was fraudulent. Second, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump himself, the defendant, knew about and ordered that entry be made. I don't think know about is enough. He had to have said to somebody, make that entry. Don't say it was reimbursement for a payment of a non-disclosure. Don't say that. Say instead something that's false, namely that it was a retainer or that it was legal expenses. I don't think there was any evidence of that at all. But the government has to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt as well. Okay, let's assume it can prove both of those things. It's a misdemeanor, and it's barred by the statute of limitations. Those alleged crimes occurred years and years ago. So that's not enough to warrant a conviction. The judge has to instruct the jury, if that's all you find, if all you find is that the entry of the record was fraudulent and that Donald Trump instructed the entry to be made, you must acquit because it wasn't within the statute of limitations. Now, in order to bring it outside the statute of limitations, you have to believe beyond a reasonable doubt here that the purpose, the intention, the reason why Donald Trump, who didn't make the entry, but why he ordered the false entry, it wasn't false, but you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the reason Donald Trump made the false entry was to hide another crime, commit another crime, cover up another crime, be an accessory to another crime. Okay, that you have to find. Then the question is which crime? We still don't know for sure. But some of the things that were thrown out were New York State tax evasion, though I don't think there's any evidence that Donald Trump actually took these legal expenses or the payment of a non-disclosure as a tax deduction. By the way, I think paying to avoid a lawsuit may very well be tax deductible, but I don't think there's any evidence that the deduction was taken. So the crime is intending to have filed a false return in the future, because the return wouldn't be filed until years later. You know how tax returns are filed by big corporations, usually 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. And I don't even know if the tax returns have been filed to this date, but there's no evidence that they claimed tax deductions. Or you have to prove, and this is the one that is so outrageous, that the intent was to defraud the voters of New York. The theory is the voters of New York all thought that Donald Trump was a virgin, or that he had sex only with somebody he was married to, and that he never deviated from monogamy, And if they learned that he had sex with a porn star, they would have changed their vote. Is there anybody in New York who didn't know that Donald Trump was a player? That Donald Trump bragged? Everybody had heard it in the Access Hollywood tape. I can touch a woman's genitals and they don't object. I can kiss them. I can do anything I want because I'm famous. I'm a celebrity. So it's inconceivable that anybody could have been defrauded. And it's inconceivable that Donald Trump, if he did order that fraudulent statement to be made in his corporate forms, did it to defraud the voters of New York.